You're listening to LVB Podcast Show with your friend, advocate, and host, Alvaro.
Hello and welcome to LVB Show. My name is Alvaro and I'm very happy to be with you tonight. Before I introduce our guest, remember that you can email me at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com to be on the show, and I'll be very happy to have you on. Tonight we have with us someone I have been following a little bit in the past few weeks. His name is John Panarese. He's the founder of Mac for the Blind. So John, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And John, my first question is, what can you tell us about your life? How did you end up with Mac for the Blind?
Basically, my background going way back to when the dinosaurs were, walking the earth. I went to school for psychology and social work, and my plan was to work with the geriatric population in some capacity, maybe as a social worker in a nursing home or something to that effect. But as things tend to happen in life, you never really, you really can't plan for anything. And when I got out of school, I couldn't really find any jobs here on Long Island that were, up my alley, what I wanted to be doing. So I first started off as a vendor reselling blindness products for an Australian company called Robotron. And that sort of snowballed into a 18 or 19 year career of technologies for the visually impaired was the name of my company. And I sold a whole bunch of different products. I imported for a couple of other overseas companies. And around 2005, I got involved with Apple. Apple came out with the Tiger, with the voiceover version for OS 10.4 Tiger, and I had family members and friends who were really big Apple product users and used to torture me constantly over the fact that I was stuck with Windows and how inferior Microsoft and Windows were, etc., etc. So when Apple came out with VoiceOver, I kind of jumped to it right away, got myself an iBook G4, and really started to learn and teach myself. There weren't tutorials, there weren't websites, there weren't trainers. You really were among a small group of blind pioneers who really taught ourselves and as a small community how to use VoiceOver on the Mac. And in 2006, I believe it was, I was at a CSUN convention in California. My dad was my business partner and travel partner throughout my whole time with TVI. And he was the type of person, we used to call him the mayor. And he would go out and he would just network with everybody and always bring people over to my table. I ended up getting to know so many vendors and so many developers and manufacturers because he would go out and bring them to me. Or we'd end up having dinner with people or lunch with people or drinks or whatever. So I had said to him on the flight over to California, I really, one of my goals in this CSUN is I really want to meet the Apple accessibility people and sort of put my name out there and get involved, because I really just think that there's going to be big things coming from Apple for the blindness community, and I'd like to, be a part of something in the beginning for a change instead of always catching the wave after, it crashes on the shore.
Right.
So sure enough, like the first day of the show, I'm dealing with customers, and all of a sudden my father comes over to me when there's a lull in the traffic, and he says, I want to introduce you to a couple of people. And it ended up being two of the people from Apple Accessibility. And that sort of began my relationship with Apple as far as that went. And I ended up getting involved as a beta tester for VoiceOver. And in 2009 or around 2009 and 10, I decided it was time to close down the business. The blindness industry, as far as a retail seller was going, was really changing significantly, and a lot of the small guys like me were just not going to be able to stay in business in this kind of economy. And my dad also was getting sick. He had Parkinson's and senile dementia, so his travel days were pretty much at an end around that time anyway. So my plan was honestly to get involved in mainstream. I wanted to get out of blindness. I wanted to get out of assistive technology. And I started looking for jobs in the more, the IT area, technology, but outside of blindness.
Right.
And a friend of mine kind of talked me into putting up macfortheblind.com as sort of a way to keep my mind busy. And, while I was looking for work, it would just be something I could kind of, as a love of labor, I still wanted to be involved with Apple, and I still love the Apple products. So I just put it up as a resource for the blindness community. And my same friend said to me, you should really put a blurb that you'd be willing to do Mac and iOS training, because, you could make some money on the side, and at least you get a couple of dollars in your pocket here and there. And I was resistant because, my first thought was, I'm not a trainer. I don't teach, I'm just not a good teacher. I never saw myself as somebody who could train people. I mean, I did a little bit of it, when I sold certain products. I had to sort of teach people how to use them, but it wasn't my, desire or goal as a career. But he finally talked me into it, and I put a little blurb on my website. And oddly enough, within the first couple of weeks, I got contacted by the states of Washington, the state of Iowa, and probably half a dozen or 10 private clients looking for Mac and iOS training. And all of a sudden it started to hit me. I'm like, you know what? I wanted to be, at the beginning of the wave, I wanted to be at the start of things. And this might actually work out well in my favor because there weren't anybody really out there who was training people on Mac or iOS.
Right.
So I followed up, and I ended up getting contracted and went and got insurance and all the stuff you needed to do to be a trainer for state agencies. And within the first year, I was looking at this going, I started doing 10 to 15 hours a week of training with people. Oh, wow. And I was like, wow, this really could be, a career.
Right.
And that's really what has happened, since 2010. That's really been my focus, is doing, Apple, Mac, and iOS training for, all over the world, really. I have clients in the UK. I've worked with people in Australia and in Singapore. So Skype and, FaceTime has really enabled me to reach a wide range, an audience.
How interesting, John, in being a pioneer. I didn't know this story, and you certainly are a pioneer in the field, which is exciting for me to learn about. For our listeners, is it possible for you to give us a little bit of a sense of pricing?
I usually charge by the hour, and it's usually $55 is what my current rate is, and, I don't ask people to commit to plans. I don't make people pay for, programs. That's okay if people want to do that, that's fine, but I usually work with people based on their situation and what their desires are when it comes to private clients. So in other words, somebody may only need 2 or 3 lessons from me and they'll be fine if that's all they're really looking for. But then there's other people who want to go the distance and they want to learn, the Mac from VoiceOver Basics all the way up to, the commanders and all the different applications and using VoiceOver. So it's really based on what you want, and I don't charge anybody for a consultation. Whether you want to do it by phone, by Skype, whatever. We could talk about exactly what options you have. What is it you're looking to get out of the training, and can I help you or not? That's really how I've been working it.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you can find in your website today?
The website is really about the community. I mean, I do have audio tutorials that I just started producing as of August that are for sale. There are a few that are free. You could freely download, and I've tried to make them as inexpensive as possible. You're dealing with the blindness community, a lot of unemployed or underemployed blind people out there. So I didn't want to kill people on the pricing.
Right.
But beyond that, it's resources for Mac users and iOS users. I have how-tos, tips and tricks, all kinds of getting started with the Mac, getting started with the iOS. Links to a variety of different demonstrations and podcasts, Apple Viz, and some foreign language voiceover sites, Spanish and French. So I've tried to include as many different resources as I possibly can that are of no charge to anybody. They can freely download. I even have a freeware section for applications and scripts that are free. And I'm trying. It's hard. The sad part, the disappointing part is that because of what I'm doing for a living, I don't have the time that I used to have to really commit to maintaining the site and keeping it up to date in certain areas. And I've been asking and hoping that I could get some help from the community. So if anybody out there is listening and has some free time and wants to, either write some articles or help me reorganize parts of the site and do some up-to-date stuff, I'm certainly open to that. I've had promises from a couple of people, and they look like they were going to follow through, but the smoke clears, and I'm still the only guy really maintaining the site at this point.
Okay, let me ask a follow-up on that one. You talk about maybe helping you write articles. What are the, you could say, what is needed to have an article approved by you?
Anything that deals with how to do something on the Mac or iOS, maybe tips and tricks, things that other users might not be aware of that you could do. If you look at the site, you'll see that I have everything from basic stuff, step-by-step, how to do this, how to do that, all the way up to more technical guides on, how to do, to boot camp and things like that. So whatever the person's background and interest might be, as long as they feel, take a look at the site, see what's up there, and just kind of think about it. And if there's anything you think you can contribute, please let me know. If you're going to reference anybody else's material, just please do me the favor and make sure that you, A, either mention that person by name to give them credit, or B, have permission from them. If you notice, I have a credits and acknowledgments section of my site that I try to give everybody who has given me permission to use their material. I like to give them credit for that.
What about suggesting applications?
Anything for the tutorials. If you have any ideas or any suggestions about what I should cover, if you have any suggestions about how-tos or tips and tricks for doing certain things, or you want to write them yourself, that's perfectly fine.
When it comes to helping you update the website, what does the person need to know?
They don't really need to know anything more than just if they have a passion for writing, or they can, put together documentation. That's really all they have to do is just send it to me, and I'll put it up on the site. If they feel comfortable, doing stuff on the site themselves, I can certainly give them access to being able to upload their own material. But, if they're not comfortable with that, all they really have to do is just send me stuff, and I'll take care of it.
Okay, so for our listeners, you can either email John or email me at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send that to John to help him out with this very powerful website. John, if you could highlight in the years that you have been using the Mac, is there a particular thing that you say this is the best feature that it has for blind users? In my view, if someone is going to buy a Mac, you would say this is something that is going to really help you a lot.
I think this is going to sound like a strange answer to that question, because I'm not going to mention anything specific as far as voiceover goes, but really the fact that you're using a Mac is a big difference. And the way I like to describe this to people is all the years, and I understand that I am not a Windows newbie or have a passing acquaintance with Windows. I started using Windows in 1993 with Windows 3.1.1 and Telesensory's product back then, through JAWS, through Synthavoice, WindowBridge products, through Window Eyes, System Access. And I still have two PCs. I have a desktop that I still run Windows 7 on, and I have a laptop. I still do some training for a contract that I have for Windows. So my point here is I'm not somebody who's just saying this out of hand.
Right.
But the way I describe it is when you work with Windows and a Windows screen reader, you're spending a lot more mental energy dealing with Windows and your screen reader. And a lot of times you're fussing and trying to get things just to work properly. When you work with a Mac, you get your work done. It's hard to explain unless you've really experienced it, but you turn on your Mac, you do what you got to do, your email, your text edit, your web browsing. You're not fighting with the Apple OS, with Mac OS crashing on you. You're not dealing with your screen reader suddenly stopping, working, or you got to make changes to get something to work properly. You just spend a lot more time enjoyably using your Mac and VoiceOver than you do with Windows. And it's at a point in which I really do dread when I got to fire up my PC and I got to sit there and wait for Window Eyes to kick in or System Access to kick in. And if I want to get onto, to Internet Explorer, or if I want to do whatever, it just seems like it's a constant battle. And I feel like I've gone, 10 rounds with Holyfield or somebody like that in the ring by the time I'm done.
John, I interview a guy that I said to him, for me, it's like Apple has some charm to it, like it has personality. I was talking about Siri, which we'll discuss a little bit later, but he said, you know what it is for me? He said, is that on Windows, I feel I'm working. On the Mac, I feel I'm having fun. It's different, the feeling, he said. And John, and for our listeners, I bought a small, very small in price and very small in size. I would say like the entry-level MacBook Pro. And I have been just using it for a little while. But I don't know what it is, John, but I find it like exciting, like it's nice, like I don't know how to explain it. But it's different. It's different than the experience with Windows. VoiceOver gets activated so easily in the Zoom and everything. So it's, I don't know what it is, but I like the way you also put it. I'm not fighting with it. So
you're right.
That's I see it the same way. And for our listeners, I'm not biased with Mac because it's the first Mac I ever see. So it's new for me. But it's a feeling. I don't know how to explain for our listeners, but I like the way you put it, John. And I would like, because I don't know this, and I know many people struggle with this, there are so many models of Mac, like the Air Pro, the Air, the MacBook, the Mac that. Is there anything better than other? Is it okay to have like I have a MacBook Pro that cost me only $900, maybe no $800? It's like a little one, but it has Yosemite installed on it. It may not have a lot of power. It has only 500 gigabytes of space and 4 gigabytes of RAM. But is the first one that I have. What is your view on what kind of Mac to buy?
I really try to be specific as far as what the person is going to use it for. I think most users out there can get away with using a MacBook Air. You can just like I just had a very good friend of mine. Actually I got her a MacBook Pro. It was a refurb, um, 4 or 5 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago. It's kind of she's having some problems with the battery and the charger heats up and stuff. And we were in the Apple store a couple of weeks ago, and I was just talking to her about the Air, and I'm like, look, you can just get away for let's face it, most people use their computer to do three things: email, web browsing, and text
Yes.
editing text, working with text.
Yes.
So if you take it from that concept, a MacBook Air with 4 or 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabyte hard drive, SSD drive, you should be fine. People say, well, Macs are, they're a little bit more expensive, and I can get a Windows laptop for $300, blah, blah, blah. And this is true, but, you got to take a couple of things into consideration. Number one, you're not paying for a screen reader, so there goes another $1,200 that you would have to pay.
Right.
Yeah, can you get Windows for free, quote unquote? There's a lot of strings attached to it, which includes having to have an Office, subscription. So the other part of it is Macs hold their value a lot more than PCs do. When you buy a $300 laptop, the moment you buy that $300 laptop, it's not even worth 20% of that if you try to resell it.
Right.
Where Macs will keep their value for years and years. I've seen MacBook Pros from 2011 still selling for $700-800 on eBay.
Wow.
And then you're not dealing with the malware, you're not dealing with the viruses, and you're not dealing with the crashes. So, your peace of mind, I call it a combination of the blind tax and peace of mind that you're saving when you go by way of an Apple. So yeah, you're spending a few more dollars in the beginning, but the long-term use you get out of that system and your sanity is worth that extra money. So, to answer your question, a MacBook Air for most people, I think it's the perfect solution. If you need more kick, if you're an audio engineer, if you think you're going to be doing stuff with Logic Pro and things of that nature, then you might want to kick it up to a MacBook or a MacBook Pro with better specifications. So, I really think it comes down to the user and what they want to get out of the system. But a MacBook Air, even the entry level or the the intermediate level MacBook Airs, I think will work fine for most of the people listening to this podcast.
Well, I have to say for listeners, John, my MacBook Pro, it may be very cheap. It was a very good rebate here in Colombia. But I told you the specifications. It's working very well. It has Yosemite, so I'm very happy.
Right, exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the operating system has evolved now to El Capitan, and do you recommend to go from Yosemite to El Capitan? Should we be upgrading?
Ultimately, yes. Is it a rush to do it right away? No. The thing about Mac operating systems is when you find one that you're happy with, unless you see there being an advantage, voiceover is, and you get this argument from a lot of people about how much has voiceover truly evolved since Tiger.
Right.
And if you look at it from that perspective, maybe not in great steps, but if you look at Tiger and compare it to El Capitan, there's major, major differences and improvements. But if you look at it from, going from Tiger to leopard, snow leopard, to, lion to mountain lion, etc., there are little increases. So, the fact of the matter is, if you're running Mavericks, if whatever you're running at this point, you don't have to feel rushed to go El Capitan. Every operating system has bugs initially, and if you're the type of person who has that belief of staying away from, what they call the 0.0 releases, meaning the first release of an operating system, then by all means, wait it out. I think 10.11.2, which will be coming out next, is going to be safe enough that I think, you should be able to upgrade As far as new things with the operating system goes, with El Capitan, as far as voiceover, the neat things that I think are worth the upgrade is that if you're the type of person who feels the control option keys as the voiceover keys is a little cumbersome to do constantly, keep in mind that with El Capitan, you do have the caps lock key as an alternative to the voiceover, to the control option key combination. Also, you do have what they call the window spots and the content chooser as part of the web item loader. So I think Apple is going to expand these uses as far as voiceover goes. But I've noticed, they're really, I'm starting to see them be very useful in things like mail, in Safari, sometimes in text edit, so I think there's little things. Is there anything major? Am I sitting here saying that you got to go to El Capitan? There's a lot of awesome things. No. But there's a few little neat little things that I think people will enjoy and benefit by going to El Capitan. But should they feel it necessary to jump to it at this very moment, November 9th, 2015? Not necessarily. You can wait.
John, for those who don't know how a blind user uses a Mac, can you tell them a little bit how do you use the Mail, Safari? How do you make the best out of your Mac?
Well, fortunately with Apple, you don't have to do much as far as configuration goes. All of the stock applications that come with the Mac work out of the box. So you have two approaches. As with most of the screen readers in the world, you have the keyboard command. So there are voiceover navigation, reading commands, things of that nature. And it's just like any other thing, JAWS or WindowWise, it comes down to having to memorize and learn some keyboard combinations. But if you are an iPhone or an iPad or an iPod Touch user who is very comfortable with the gestures, the 1, 2, 3, 4-finger gestures, if you have an Apple laptop that has the multi-touch glass trackpad, or you get the Magic trackpad for your iMac desktop, you then can use what is called Trackpad Commander that will allow you to use your standard iOS gestures and even have some icing on the cake as far as having some additional Mac-specific gestures and the ability to customize and add your own gestures to carry out specific voiceover commands on the Mac. So whatever you're most comfortable with, that's, I use personally a hybrid, sort of situation. When I'm on my iMac and I have my full-size keyboard, 95% of what I do is keyboard driven. I do have a Magic trackpad, but I don't use that often when I'm sitting at home with my desktop. But when I go out on the road and I take my MacBook Pro, then I'm more strongly a trackpad user because the trackpad's right there in front of me, and I can use it, readily and over the keyboard. So, how you use the Mac that's the beauty of it, is it's your choice. And as I said, there's not a great deal of customization involved. So you could be a brand new newbie to the Mac, just turn it on, and as long as you, get comfortable with the tutorial, the quick start tutorial, and the different resources that are online out there, whether it's my audio tutorials or appleviz.com with David Woodbridge's material, you're going to be easily up and running with a Mac and be able to be productive within the first couple of months of owning it.
John, something that blew me away when I first noticed what the Mac had to offer is that Apple was able to incorporate the iOS gestures into the Mac, as you are saying, in the trackpad. I think that is incredible, to be honest. I never thought using a cell phone would give me some tools to use in a computer. You know what I mean?
It is amazing, and I can't tell you how many clients that has made the adjustment to come over from Windows to the Mac easier because they have the iOS experience. They're competent and comfortable iPhone or iPad users,
right?
And suddenly they can use these gestures on their Mac, and they're getting things done.
I don't know who had that idea, but that is great.
It's brilliant, yes.
Now, I wonder, I'm a great fan of Siri. For me, Siri on my iPhone has been, to be honest with you, John, for me, it should be added to the accessibility features of the iPhone.
Right.
Because for me, nobody told me about Siri being useful for blind people. Nobody told me. But for me, it has been even better than everything else. I use it every single day since 3 years ago. So my question is, will Siri become part of the Mac?
I hope so. And there's been a lot of rumors that Apple is transitioning, because now, you have Cortana as part of Windows 10 and everybody's saying, well, Microsoft beat Apple to the punch. And the reality is, no, Microsoft doesn't do anything well to begin with. No offense, but it's got a lot of problems as it is. But the reality is, I think when Apple does add Siri to the Mac, it's going to make Cortana look like, a joke.
Right.
I think the next operating system, you're going to have Siri integration. Look at the way they just integrated it with the Apple TV. I don't think Apple doesn't do things just because people say they should.
Right.
When they take the step to do something, they make sure it's done in a way that is going to be, great for the consumer. So if you look at the way the dictation feature on the Mac has evolved with the enhanced dictation and the advanced dictation commands that you can enable, it only leads me to believe that Siri will be implemented in the next version of the operating system. And I think it's just going to blow people's minds on how well it's going to be useful.
Oh my God, I'm getting excited already, John. in a question, should you buy a new computer when that happens, or only upgrade your operating system and does that?
I'm guessing that you'll be able to upgrade regardless. The basic rule that Apple has been following over the last couple of operating systems, as long as the system is flash memory capable, you're able to upgrade it. So my guess is that whatever comes next, you're going to be able to take advantage of whatever is available in that operating system.
I always watch the Apple events when a new release of iOS comes in, and you see Tim Cook and this brilliant British guy who deals with design and everything there as well. And they did a demonstration of this hands-off continuity. I got very excited. Not many people that I know use that. Can you tell us a little bit about it, and have you used it?
I use it all the time. It was one of the things that really got my interest in it. And as far as the handoff and continuity goes, so let's say you're in the car coming home from someplace and you're looking at an email and you start to reply to that email and you're sitting there saying, you know what, the dictation keeps messing up on me. I want to sit down at my keyboard and actually do this. Or maybe there's some reference material on my computer that I need to paste into this email. So you go to your Mac, you turn your Mac on, and when you look at the dock, there'll be an icon that basically will say something like mail from your iPhone. So when you VO space on that, it will actually open up the mail application for you and put you in that message that you were creating. And you could pick it up right from there. If you had a website open on one device, you could go and pick it up. Like, let's say you had to leave. Let's take the opposite situation. You're sitting on your desktop at home and you're web browsing, and you get to this great site that you wanted to have time to look at, but you don't. You got to go to work or you got to go to an appointment. So you get into the cab or the paratransit or whatever, and you get your iPad or your iPhone turned on, and you could pick it up. Right, you can pick that website up right where you had it. It'll open up. It'll be one of the tabs available to you to open. So I use this all the time, and obviously the other part of it is like, you could do text messaging from your Mac, even if it's an SMS, if it's not an iMessage situation. You can answer your phone and make phone calls from your Mac and use it as a giant speakerphone. I've done this. I just actually did this a couple of hours ago with somebody called. I was actually doing something on the Mac when my cell phone started ringing. So I had the headphones already plugged in. So FaceTime comes up on the Mac as an option to answer the call.
Oh, wow.
So I just accepted, and there I was talking to on the phone with that person on the Mac though.
Wow, wow. And how do you activate hands off?
You have to just make a couple of adjustment changes. You got to make sure that the handoff is turned on both of your devices. You got to be signed into the same iCloud account. So if you have separate individual iCloud accounts, you got to make sure that you're using the same account for all the devices you want to have handoff and continuity available to you. So as long as you have that, like I believe it's in FaceTime settings on the Mac and on the iPhone or the iPad that you have to make sure that there's call forwarding for cell phones. Call forwarding. Just make sure those buttons are turned on or checked, and it should work fine. I've been doing it since 10.10 and iOS 8, so it definitely works well.
Now, you were saying before that it's really hard to get malware or a virus on Mac compared to the easiest thing that is on a Windows computer. Why is that?
So it's an architecture thing. I mean, and I know there's got to be a few of your listeners out there who are going to hear this and go, "Oh, that's because nobody uses Macs and everybody uses Windows, so nobody writes viruses for Macs," which is a bunch of crap. That's basically 1999 mentality. The reality is that OS X is based on a Unix foundation. It's very difficult to write viruses for a command line interface. Windows, the reality, the dirty little secret that Microsoft doesn't like to advertise is that even at Windows 10, the chassis of Windows is DOS. They still have the same backdoor security breaches that any hacker with half a brain can take advantage of and exploit in Windows. And that's why you got, what is it now, 550 or 650,000 known viruses and malware for Windows. And I think there's 16 truly proven malware for the Mac.
Wow.
And the rule of thumb with a Mac user is as long as you're intelligent and you don't okay things you're not familiar with,
right,
you're not going to get any kind of malware or virus. And everything that's happened to the Mac over the last couple of years, people seem to leave out the fact that it's happened through Flash and other third-party avenues. Nothing through OS X itself. And like I said, as long as you are a careful user and you read the stuff that's out there, and again, if you feel comfortable running an antivirus on the Mac, there are accessible, ones out there. If that really makes you feel comfortable, then I'm not trying to dissuade or discourage anybody from doing that. I know there are plenty of Mac users, even sighted Mac users, who run antivirus and and malware, defenders and stuff like that. But realistically speaking, you basically can open up an email in Windows and get a virus. On the Mac, you really got to do something. It's like if you're visiting a porn website and they tell you have to plug in, you have to add this new plugin, video plugin. I think twice about doing something like that. Right. So from a Mac standpoint, as long as you're an intelligent and user who understands that you just don't okay plugins or add-ons just because the system suddenly tells you, that's just, you just don't do that.
Right. Now, talking about applications for the Mac, you have mentioned TextEdit, I think is the one you have mentioned. Is that like a notepad for Windows?
No, it's actually it's more or less a full-blown word processor. It kind of has a misnomer, and people sort of get confused because they hear TextEdit and they think of Notepad or WordPad. It's actually a pretty robust word processor within itself. You can do italicizing, boldface, center, justifying, a lot of double spacing, all of the things that you would basically do on any word processor. So I use TextEdit pretty much every day for a lot of the word processing needs that I have. If you're a student or a professional who needs a little bit more kick as far as special kind of formatting and, headers and footers and stuff like that, then you know what? You might be better off with something like Pages. Microsoft Office is the 2016 version is accessible to VoiceOver. You do need at the moment an Office 365 subscription, but my understanding from speaking to a couple of Microsoft customer service individuals is that they're going to have a standalone version of Excel and Word and PowerPoint available for purchase by the end of the year. So you won't need to have the 365 subscription. I refuse to pay the subscription fee at this point.
I'm with you, John. How much do you think will be the individual Word?
That who knows with Microsoft. I knowing Microsoft's track record, I don't think it's going to be a few shekels. I think I think you're going to be talking probably a couple of $100 most likely. I don't see them following the Apple model for $19 for a word processor.
Oh, okay. Any other applications that you think are essential to download on the Mac for starters?
It depends on what needs you have. Skype, obviously, as we're doing right now. I'm running Skype on the Mac. You have things like, Mac DVD Ripper Pro if you're into DVDs and you want to back up your DVDs. You have Audiobook Builder if you want to create audiobooks from CD that you want to listen to on your iPad or your iPod. There's a lot of different. It depends on what you need. Like if you're looking for OCR, you have DocuScan Plus from Ciratech. You have Abby Fine Reader Pro for the Mac. You have Prismo. You have VooScan. So there's a lot of different options, and hopefully Duxbury will have their Braille translator version for the Mac, done. Hopefully by into next year, from what I've heard from different people. It really comes down to what is it you want to do with the Mac? What's your interest? There's games. There's all kinds of stuff you can download. The Mac App Store is certainly a good place to start, but I would always recommend taking a look at appleviz.com for new information about accessible apps for the Mac or iOS for that matter. Those guys, that community has all the answers. So if you have a specific interest, if you're looking for a specific type of Mac application and you want to know if there's anything accessible, that's the place to do a search and you'll get answers.
I have to say, John, I did an interview with those guys. They are wonderful.
Yes,
they are doing
great
a lot
people
for the community. I'm with you. I like the way you talk about them because we need to help each other and promote what helps the community. Now, if you don't go to the Mac store, what is your advice to find a reliable source to download a program, an application, besides the Mac store?
Well, there's a lot of third-party vendors, but always be careful about. Make sure what you're downloading is from a reputable developer. Make sure that people know about it. Don't just download oddball programs because that's how, as I said earlier, you do invite malware and other issues on your system.
Right.
So you should always, and you do have your gatekeeper settings that protect you. But it's not a perfect solution. Nothing's perfect, and as they say, there's always going to be attempts to build the proverbial better mousetrap. And when it comes to people, hackers, and people who are looking to do no good, you never trust the internet is not the most trustworthy place in the world. So I would always, verify any third-party application. Make sure it's coming from a developer. If Macworld is advertising, if Apple Insider, then that's fine. But if it's just some off the beaten path third party vendor that says, "Oh, this is the greatest, audio extractor in the universe," don't necessarily trust that, because you might be putting a piece of malware on your system without even, knowing that you're doing it.
Right, right. Two last questions and a curiosity. I think I'm going to go with the curiosity first. Are you using, or are you interested in using HomeKit?
I'm interested in. I'm not using it, but I'm definitely interested. I think it's got so much potential, especially for a blind person.
Yeah.
And depending on what vendors do with it, like everything from controlling the thermostat in your house, the air condition, the heat, to turning on and off the alarm, your garage, just getting your food going.
Yeah.
Everything can be done wirelessly and via Bluetooth in this day and age. And I think from a blind person who lives independently,
yeah,
I think HomeKit has got so much potential for us.
Yeah, I'm with you, and for our listeners, I asking this because I saw a video on YouTube of someone trying HomeKit with Siri to activate lights and things like that, and I was blown away. And I said, give this a few years and I'm gonna be of course in that line buying that one.
Yeah, I mean, like I think like Honeywell, I think has a thermostat that is got an app for the iPhone, so you could be anywhere. Like you could be on your way home, and let's say you live in let's say one of the New England states or in the Midwest, and it's like 20 below, and your house, you want to make sure your house, the heat is nice and warm by the time you get home. You can actually use this app to turn your thermostat on and make sure that the heat is on in your house, So stuff like that has got so much potential for, not just the sighted world, but for the blind world as well.
Yeah. And my two last question. One is related to accessibility on Safari with VoiceOver when browsing websites. I have a lot of problems on Windows. And I still have a little bit of sight, John, and I use Zoom Text, but for instance, Google Chrome is very inaccessible with my Zoom Text, and I'm very frustrated with it. Like with many things on Google, it's very confusing for me, I have to say. I want to know your experience in going to Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Gmail, Outlook on the Mac with VoiceOver in general. Is it good?
Well, the first thing to understand is one of the biggest things that you have to understand with Safari and VoiceOver is you got to really be comfortable and know how to use VoiceOver on the web. A lot of times people run into these issues where Safari and VoiceOver, it's just not a really good solution, and Windows is better. And when I start to question people that say that to me, what it comes down to 9 times out of 10 is that they're not properly used. They don't know how to browse with VoiceOver. Oh. So the first part of the answer to your question is you really have to know how to use either QuickNav or some of the content, browsing shortcuts and the things that most people take for granted in the Windows world that they just, for whatever the reason, assume that the Mac and VoiceOver doesn't have, even though it does.
Right.
So when you go as far as your browser and your screen reader. So don't assume or dismiss, that Safari is a bad web browser and VoiceOver doesn't work well on the web, simply because of the fact that most people out there may not be using it properly. And I'm not saying this out of arrogance or to be a smart, Weisenheimer or whatever. Right. This is just as a trainer who has worked with people for 5 years that I just know that this ends up being the real issue. But the other part of the question is you got to also remember that the Mac and VoiceOver and Safari are under the same constraints as your Windows screen reader and the web. In other words, the web is not created equal for blind people. And right. You are going to run into issues. Facebook, for example, I think anybody will agree that Facebook, I'd like to have some strong words for, what's his name, Zuckerberg or whatever his name is, about Facebook, because they don't get accessibility. It doesn't matter whether you're using Windows or the Mac. The main Facebook.com site is a nightmare, and you're better off using the mobile site m.facebook.com or finding yourself an application as a workaround. Twitter, the main Twitter website, is a mess. In some ways, it is a little bit more accessible if you know what you're looking at compared to Facebook, but you're still better off getting something like Twitterific or just a native Twitter app on the iPhone or the iPad, or using something like Night Owl on the Mac, as an alternative for dealing with Twitter. Google Chrome on the Mac is actually not too bad. If you'd rather use Chrome over Safari, it does work fairly well. Firefox is okay on the Mac if you're willing to put up with a little sluggishness. Mozilla still has a little ways to go with that project, but at least they're going in the right direction. But, I'm content myself with Safari and VoiceOver, and, the websites that I need to visit and deal with on a daily basis, I can do just as well on my Mac with VoiceOver and Safari than I can do on Windows with System Access or JAWS or Window Eyes.
And my final question is just something that, is always on my mind, John. I know many people will find it even silly. It's just me. So some people were laughing at me having an iPhone in the past few years, saying you can only have music free on Android, which I found out was not true, but I didn't know at the beginning. I thought the iPhone didn't have that possibility. It has, but something that I want your opinion on is when it comes to transferring music from the Mac to the iPhone, or from a PC to the iPhone. I was reading that now with Bluetooth technology, you are able to transfer files and images from Mac to the iPhone. But music remains not to be done. My question to John is, I know how Apple is. Do you think someday, maybe in 20 years, you'll be able to transfer a song from any computer to your iPhone, meaning that the song will go into the native music application instead of going to any other application and then not be able to get to the native music application? Again, this is only something.
Now, my question is, I don't know if this works or not, but my understanding is that iMazing, it's a Mac application, I thought allows you to transfer music without needing iTunes. But I mean, don't quote me on that, because it might not, it's been one of these things I've been meaning to look into. But to kind of answer your question, I think that Apple is going to move away from the iTunes model as it stands. And the only reason why I'm led to believe that is if you look at the way the iOS, it's kind of broken up the iTunes application into a video app, a music app, a separate store for applications. Right. You got the iBooks for audiobooks now and electronic books. I think that Apple is going to make that kind of be the case on the Mac. Whether it's going to happen this year, I don't know, maybe not. But I think you're going to have a situation where I think they're going to loosen up a little bit. I think that, Tim Cook's philosophy is different than Steve Jobs was. And I think Steve Jobs was a lot more of a control freak and really instituted a lot of the the tightness, I guess you'd call it, to Apple. Right. And I think under Tim Cook, you're starting to see that loosen up quite a bit. Yeah. And I really think that, that Apple is moving towards a model where, there might just be a music app, a videos app. There already is a photos app. You have iBooks for that they've taken, the books away from the iTunes, the need for iTunes. So,
Right.
I think that is going to happen.
What you say is interesting about the difference between Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. I think Tim Cook also has been one of the great salesperson, right? I mean,
Yes.
they have Apple at the top in the history of the world,
Well,
really.
he's an engaging guy, and that's and again, it's I'm not trying to speak ill of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was Steve Jobs. He's an iconic person.
Yes.
You could say whatever you want about his personality, but he brought Apple from the brink of bankruptcy and disaster in 1997 to leaving it in the capable hands of Tim Cook and to keep going forward. But I just think, you can't compare Tim Cook to Steve Jobs. They're two different people, and I just think that Tim is a lot more of an engaging individual.
Mm,
I think he is a better salesman.
mm,
He doesn't have that abrasive quality that
right.
Steve Jobs would rub a lot of people the wrong way with.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a great point. Um, so, John, finally, how can people get in touch with you and visit your website?
Well, the website is www.macfortheblind.com, MacFortheblind.com. You can reach me by email, john@macfortheblind.com, JOHN@macfortheblind.com, or you can call the office, 631 area code 724-4479. I am in New York on Eastern, East Coast time in America. So whatever is easiest for you.
John, if you can stay just a couple of minutes, I have a little comment for you. Now that I know that you live in New York, which I didn't know before. So thank you so much, John, for your time and expertise. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure our listeners want to go to the Mac store and get a Mac right now or a.
I hope so.
Me too, John. And for our listeners, remember you can email us at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com to be on the show. So from LVB Show, this is Alvaro saying good night.